Now we're recording. All right. I was gonna I was gonna say I really appreciate the weekly update emails. Those look like they take a long time, and I love that rotation that's going on. That's really awesome. But I've heard a few people out in the wild say, "Wow, these are great." They really give me a great snapshot of what's happening in the project right now, and it's a weekly reminder. There's stuff that I can maybe contribute to. So just a huge kudos to, I think is it David, Josh, and who else is doing these? Jordan, you're doing them. So
John Meredith and Jordan.
John Meredith.
John Meredith, yeah. Three
Not
J's.
to say David's not doing a boatload of other things, because he is.
Yes.
Currently involved in all the other things besides the weekly update. All right. So yeah, we could start there with just anybody wants to take like a quick status shot on where 4.0 is. Remember, this is being recorded, so use big words.
Well, I mean, so I'll say, like, so when I did the status update last week, we hit a pretty big milestone. I might be buried in there a little bit, that we had all of the alpha tickets assigned for the first time ever in the project. So that's really rad. And then also great to see the folks who have worked on the testing fixes recently. We knocked down a bunch of tickets in that area, and that's really awesome to see too. I was starting to say at the beginning, but since we're on the recorded part now, I think one area, the area that could use the most love are the epic tickets around the larger testing plan. I kind of started encouraging people that were either assigned or somehow indicated involvement in the ticket to start thinking about like a prioritized list of what they'd want to test in those areas. Saw some movement on that in the, I think, like packaging area. So thanks to the folks who picked that up and are working on that.
Might as well just chime in here with a couple things. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware or if this was already discussed at a previous meeting, but the docs have reached a pretty damn good state. We no longer have a single to-do item in there, like just missing docs. Like there used to just be data modeling with the to-do. So all those JIRAs were merged in. I'm currently reworking some stuff and adding production recommendations to try and help folks with their first clusters so they don't screw up the way I think I saw several hundred clusters make the same mistake, so I know what to put there. And I'm also preparing to do a series of blog posts around 4.0, highlighting improvements in performance, node density, things like that. So I have a whole bunch of tooling I can use to actually give some interesting numbers. So when we release it, we can say things like, compaction is 25% faster or whatever, some additional numbers around streaming, be able to provide additional guidance to folks, because there's still a lot of nonsense that people talk about. Like I hear people say like, oh, no more than 1 terabyte per node. I'm like, it's not 2014. Like we can do better than that. So we're really trying to help people see the advantage of moving up as opposed to sticking with old versions. I think at TLP, I found that probably half the folks were still running pre-3.0. So that's just where that stuff is.
It'd be cool too to get some of the work that Netflix presented at the Bay Area, like Cassandra user. It's not like Cassandra runners meeting thing that became this thing. But they had presented some work on testing the new messaging service and performance there. That could be interesting to share as well. I unfortunately don't see any of them on today.
It was in the JIRA too, Jordan. If you look at the last bit of the JIRA for that whole thread had intermixed in it. They had all the images from like the ping files. So yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we should just surface that in a blog post, more like for users instead of contributors kind of thing. Not that, John, you shouldn't do your stuff too. I just meant like to have multiple sources, different kinds of workloads, etc.
Yeah, I would love to see the blog actually be active. If we can get more contributors on it, I think it'd be great if we were rolling out a couple posts a month. Because right now, to the outside world, it looks like the project is basically dead. So I want to make sure that we kind of revive it and convince the world that Cassandra is not a dead project, and maybe, we're actually doing things.
I'll volunteer to help you with that, Sid.
Awesome.
Back in the saddle again. Let's do it, man.
Yeah.
Get your deep V on. Let's go.
Oh yeah, John, if you need review for blog posts, hit me up.
All right, cool. We'll do.
Same here.
Sweet. Yeah. I'll put a cry out in the Cassandra dev. Hopefully someone can.
What I think has been helpful, this is kind of my world a bit, is just like a common spreadsheet, something like that, where we can line out some topics and let people pick them, take them and run with them. And then it just gives us, it gives everyone an idea. Oh, here's a great bunch of stuff. Oh, I can add my 2 cents to this one or something like that. So John, maybe if you and I can spend a minute, we could probably come up with at least a few months worth of blog posts that way.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could even line up some like use case style stuff where it was like guest posts from folks that are actually using a new feature or something that isn't interesting.
Well, like you mentioned Netflix, that they were doing some testing. Oh, that would be the right author for that blog.
Okay, so we already have a list at some point. We had put together a list of blog posts that we would like, or topics for blog posts that you would like to see. I can go look if I have that list somewhere, and I can share it. It's the usual suspects: streaming, repair, and those kind of things.
Yeah, that'd be, if there's already one out there. So here's what I can do. I can go ahead and just create a spreadsheet and make it wide open, and let's just use that to copy and paste stuff in there. I have kind of a format we can use. So if that works for you, Dinesh.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we did 4.0 status, docs, yay, blog posts, yay, getting the word out. Love all that. Anybody, so are there other topics that need to come up right now? Anything worth arguing over?
I actually just thought of one that's going to be kind of important. I don't know how much discussion has been around this, but what's the status of the drivers? As if it's kind of a critical path type thing.
What's the question about drivers?
What is
they're still being developed and maintained, and we intend to have 4.0 support as soon as the impacting features are available. Is that what you're asking, or otherwise?
Yeah. I was asking where that is so far. Like, has any work been done on that? Since I don't think they're.
Yeah, most recently the drivers have received support for transient replication metadata, and let's see, multiple hosts or ports per host. The thing we're still tracking is the revised protocol level checksumming. I think Sam is working on that, but we haven't seen a prototype yet, so no further development on that front for the drivers.
In the I have to mention a version here. So on the Java driver, is the plan to only include the 4.0 support in the 4.0 version of the Java driver? Because that was such a big change that I don't expect people to be able to actually make application level changes at the level that they're required, especially if they're pulling configuration from anything other than that new configuration file thing that's in there. It's actually a big item on my list of grievances. So is there plans to put
backward 4.0 support?
Yeah, or is this a you have to move to the 4.0 in the driver, basically forcing everybody to do a major app rewrite?
Our general stance has been we're doing forward development on the driver 4.0 line, and we would generally like to avoid backporting things, but there's still open source Apache projects. So if people have the desire and the bandwidth to backport, we welcome pull requests, and we can also talk about doing that work, but we haven't started it yet.
Okay, that's a little okay. Yeah, I think that's going to present a major problem for the community if we roll out 4.0 and like you have to upgrade your driver do a driver migration to 4.0. I didn't see a single person use the 4.0 version of the driver at TLP, and I've actually tried to port applications to it, and I hit significant hurdles to the point where it was a complete non-starter for me. Like I did a bunch of client work and like I had to get cut off because I was taking so much time to do it. It's like
okay, just back to the comment about rolling out server 4.0 and requiring driver changes. I don't think 3x is broken for 4.0. It just wouldn't have necessarily the new opt-in features. Does that make sense?
I would consider that broken then. Like if you can't use the features, then it doesn't really work.
So to kind of poke the bear, open Pandora's box, like who should do that implementation in the driver? Because it's an open source project and it's Apache licensed. So
I mean, if DataStax wants to, if DataStax wants to own the drivers, then that's sort of the if DataStax is going to say we own the drivers, then you're basically claiming responsibility for it.
Well, I think we should all talk about that. And back in 2016, the PMC said we don't want the drivers in tree, and there's nowhere else for them to live. So like this is something we could talk about again if we wanted to. If
the folks at DataStax want to contribute the drivers to the project, I would be a firm +1 on that. I think that having it not as part of the project is a giant mistake. I also think that DataStax kind of holds the project over a barrel because you guys get to just decide what to do with drivers and whatnot. Like you could theoretically not do any work and never support something like transient replication or
that is all very true, John.
You know,
I don't think anybody's denying that. Like in your mind, would you think all the drivers being in tree would make sense? Just the Java driver, the other drivers being elsewhere?
I would love to
look like?
In my ideal world, we would, and you know, in my perfect world, I'd love to see all the like a new Cassandra drivers repo, all of them just being in there, and everybody that's currently commits to those things, we just fast track everybody in as a committer with the understanding that you're already committing to the drivers. We trust you to keep doing it. I can't obviously speak for everybody, but I would, different repo. Yeah. The current build system in Cassandra is so tragically awful that
you love build.xml and you know it.
I know. I love those 2,000 lines of just build configuration.
Nothing like XML.
But having a single drivers repo with all of the drivers that we do intelligently with Gradle as subprojects. That let's just assume all that stuff is done correctly. I'd love to see that in there, and then it at least puts us in a position where that we have there's some incentive for people to work on the drivers, because right now, like, let's take transient replication. Area, like there was a bunch of work done on it, and then it's sort of like, okay, now we hope that the driver work will be done.
Well, they never offered to build those features in the driver. I sort of object to your statement that anybody held the project over a barrel.
I'm not saying anybody did. I'm saying someone could.
If somebody wants to
has not had the most friendly community standpoint. So let's just take it back a year. If DataStax wanted to say, not be involved at all, you guys could just say, fuck it, we're just doing DSE drivers. I'm not saying that you are doing that. I want to be really, really clear. I'm saying the potential for a problem is there. And by moving things to the neutral ASF ground, it makes it so that it's not a risk anymore. Like right now, we're sort of saying, hey, everybody's just trusting each other, but there's no like fail safe in case you know,
Not that I would advocate for a vendor, quote unquote, owning drivers, but just the kind of the devil's advocate, the counterpoint to that is their ASLV2. So if DataStax as a corporate entity decided we're going to get dickish about the drivers, it could just be forked.
But we can't.
Fine.
We actually can't do a hostile fork. It's the same reason why that group wasn't able to pull Titan into the ASF, because
you're saying
legal
fork it
actually
into the
got
ASF. Yeah.
and said we're going to
Makes
fucking
sense.
sue you. So we actually can't. Yes, you're right. They could be forked, but then it has to be again a benevolent third party willing to maintain it. We can't pull it into Apache.
It makes sense.
So while I would love to just say, hey, let's fork it right now and bring it in, it just doesn't work that way.
How would we, because we've talked about this, like individuals that are currently employed by DataStax that work on these drivers and have a point of view, there's a risk of fragmentation. Like I know back when I was working on features in the code base, like I would barely do a ghetto implementation in Python so I could actually test it inside the code base, but it was not pretty and it required somebody else to clean it up because I'm not a Python driver dev.
Sure.
I'm certainly not Go, SQL, C#, C++, whatnot. I'm not going to go in there and do a good job with all that. So how do we as a project, if we've got 5 or 6 different drivers inside a foundation, how do we make sure that they remain with feature parity with each other unless we have a benevolent third party resource?
That's a good question. I think the same problem exists right now when they're vendor maintained.
Yeah.
I think that folks that work on drivers are going to keep working on drivers. I don't think you're going to see Alexi Benedict Blake decide that they're going to spend most of their time on the driver side of things and just improve one driver and not touch the others. It seems very counterintuitive, and it's one of the reasons why in my head it makes sense to just say, if you're already committing to the drivers, then you should continue to be a committer. It's sort of, to me, it's kind of like a package deal. I don't know if it is that's how it really works, but again, in my fantasy, it's just, it should not change how the drivers are developed right now. It really just changes the entity that owns it in a way that prevents, hit by a bus problems from happening.
A diplomatic way to phrase it. Bus full of people driving off a cliff, whatever bus metaphor you want to go with.
Right.
I believe the term is bus factor 1. So you do not want a bus factor of 1.
Right. Yeah.
So aside from the whole in tree, out of tree conversation, not that we can't keep talking about that, but I think the other conversation that we almost started to have before that was kind of interesting is setting some sort of standard like we did for alpha, beta, and release candidate about what is expected from the drivers, because it sounds like there's pretty big disconnect on if we want the current major version to support everything or the new major version, or do people need to change their driver to upgrade to 4.0? I mean, those seem like important things to figure out in the whole Cassandra 4.0 is ready when 4.0 is released thing, because you need a client to use the database. And for the record, I'm actually not in the camp that the driver needs to support all the new features, but it does seem like an important conversation to have.
So wait, could you repeat just what's the core part of that? I kind of got lost in I got caught in the last sentence
there. Sorry. Talking for the release candidate, what is expected out of the current major of the driver and the future major of the driver? I'm going to stop there and then I'll elaborate if you need more.
I think if we don't have I think if we don't have a fully functional Java driver when it's released, then there's no point in even doing it. It's just hey, we're releasing a new database and maybe one of the drivers will work. I'd love to see the Python one as well. I mean, that to me.
When you say fully functional, what do you mean by fully functional?
I mean, if you go and enable transient replication on your database and you connect with the Java driver and it crashes because it can't parse the 3/1, then that's that's horrible. That's the worst user experience. I think we should at least aim for, things work with every driver.
You said something though
include-
about like you don't want that driver to be the next major or something. That's where I got a little bit.
The issue is that and some of this is speculation on my part, but I noticed that the changes in the 4.0 version of the driver basically involve instead of configuring the driver through code, it's now through a configuration file. And so in addition to a lot of things moving around within the driver, most of which make perfect sense, it changes the way that you have to configure the driver. So it's now closer, if you want to do it programmatically, it's closer to like a Python multi-dimensional map than it is a nice fluent API. And I definitely noticed that when there was the last DataStax conference, there was you just download this file and everything just magically works. Unfortunately, the effort to port from an existing application to the new one, it means that like you pretty much have to refactor your entire code base. And so it means that if someone wants to move to 4.0, if they have a large enough code base, it could be something like a several week-long project.
When you say 4.0 here, sorry, you're talking about the client version or the database version?
In this case, the client version. So moving to a
Okay.
new version of the client right now is a lot of work, and it's not something that can be done incrementally. It has to be done all at once. So any code any code base is going to have a commit that touches every file that uses Cassandra in some way. And my experience, like I said, with it was such a disruptive change that it was like, don't want to do it. So we essentially have the driver now sandbagging Cassandra, because it just does. If you can't use the new features, then for a lot of people, that's going to prevent them from migrating.
This is like the age-old question of like, when do you break APIs or not? Like, when do you remain tied to the past versus moving to the future? And it probably helps the hygiene of a project to have an answer for that before changes go off and be made. Like, it's kind of gray space on when do we make changes that could be API breaking to the drivers or not. I think is
I
that
agree
accurate
with
to
you.
say, John? That's kind of the big problem here. Is it does take a lot of client changes to integrate with this driver because it's architecturally different in some ways.
And the other thing is that decisions like that get to be made unilaterally by a vendor rather than by the actual company, by the organization that maintains the project. So we as the PMC, I have no say.
Putting that part aside for a sec, not that I don't think it's an interesting discussion, but just like on the technical side for one more moment, like I guess that, you had said that the most embarrassing thing is that someone goes and turns on transient replication and the client breaks. I think to me, the more baseline embarrassing thing is someone upgrades to 4.0 and their existing client breaks. Like,
Yes.
I agree with you completely that I've watched having to upgrade lots and lots and lots and lots of clusters to 3.0. And I've watched how hard and how long it was to get people to change clients, that needs to definitely be like of minimal friction.
Yeah.
And then that minimal friction client needs to be able to talk to 4.0. And so at least, like, my opinion aside, it seems, and I think Josh started to get at this, like, it seems useful for us to spell out, like we did for alpha, beta, and RC, what is expected of whatever it is, the 3.0 and 4.x series clients moving forward. And maybe to help solve some of what you spoke about, like, we can discuss that as a community. Caveat, obviously, like, DataStax is providing the majority of the resources for the work and is going to have a lot of say because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So can we just summarize what John's saying is that we don't want the three C's of the driver to like explode when people update to Cassandra 4.0. So that we can just summarize as, hey, let's just have a graceful failure mode when we update to 4.0 on the server side. So, but what John, you're trying to say is that we also need to support, or at least have support for new features in the 3 series of the driver which is a bigger discussion, it seems. So if people upgrade to the 4.0 driver, leads to a lot of application refactoring and work, but the baseline that you have is everybody needs to you don't want people to update to 4.0 in order to get the 4.0 capabilities on the server side, because it will lead to too much work on the client side. But as far as my baseline is concerned, is that if people upgrade on the server side to 4.0, they will be in mixed mode for a while we are updating the nodes individually, and at that point they need to use the 3.0 driver. They can potentially preemptively update the 4.0 driver, but I think that's a bigger, headier discussion. So we just don't want the driver to fail in case of people upgrading to 4.0 on the server side. I think we can move past that, right? As long as that understanding is correct.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. I just want to reduce friction to 4.0 because there's been, like, I think we've done in the history of the project, there's been a bunch of things that have been friction, one of which is, data loss and horrific bugs and new features being broken. I think we've addressed a lot of this stuff on the server side. I think this is going to be the best release that we've ever had as a project. Like, there's so much good work going into this. It's amazing. And the thing that I don't want is for folks to go, I want to upgrade to 4.0, but there's this uncertainty around the driver. Like, there's this mystery. Do I have to change my whole code base? Like, I want to get people to this version.
I think this is you're driving the right point, which is anything that gets in the way of people adopting the right thing is the wrong thing. And we can probably address this many ways with code, education, like that blog post. Like, here's the word. This is how you do it. This is what needs to be done. This is what you can rely on. But it shouldn't be, and you jump through fiery hoops and good luck, bro.
Yep.
So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. And I'm honestly, I'm not against the idea of, especially since I now see that there's a programmatic API. I'm not against evolution in the driver. Like, I want to be really clear. Like, I'm not like, hey, we have to stick with the same API. I made the point earlier, there were a lot of really good changes that simplified things. I believe that going away from like Java's futures to built-in Java ones, to fix like the chaining of API calls was a nice improvement. The organization of the library made a lot more sense. There were so many really good improvements. I just think that what I'd like to see is something a little bit more gradual so that we can get people over that initial hump. And then we say, hey, we're gonna have another release in a year. Okay, cool. Then you can move on to the next version of the driver. It's just a lot better. But I don't want that to stop people. You're right.
The example I always look at is Python. 273.0, just take a look at how that works out. Like, that's obviously not how you ensure continuity.
Exactly. I mean, I stopped using Python completely, partially because of that. It's garbage.
And because you
Python
found
did
Rust
not
and
make
got
that
joy.
any easy. Yeah, well, Python didn't make that easy on anybody. Like,
No. Yeah, we can definitely, that's absolutely right about Python. It's the perfect example that we should just do the opposite of.
yeah, but yeah, I think the standard that like the minimal amount of client upgrade to get to 4.0, and I don't know what that means because honestly, I should be a little bit more familiar with the clients. But if that means like putting a few things in the 3.0 series of the client and then the 4.0 series having like all the features or something, but just like, again, watching the pain of getting a bunch of people to upgrade their client before upgrading their database. The easier we can make that, the better, I think.
Yeah. And I think
So
that
Jordan,
maybe one of the things that we should be very, go ahead.
Sorry. So the point I was trying to make earlier, and even, I mean, one of the options that might be is basically keep the same public API, but internally use the 4.0 drivers internals, right? Like, people care about the public API. They usually don't care about the internals. The only other thing that they care about is that the new version of the driver doesn't pull in dependencies that break their existing application. These are the two main things that I've at least experienced in the past that as long as you keep the same public API and you don't pull in dependencies that's going to cause their applications to bloat or explode in production, as long as you keep those two things, people don't care what you do internally, right? So is there a middle ground where we can potentially add a shim?
I don't know, but generally +1.
Wait, the question is what was your question, Dinesh?
Can we basically wrap
add
the
a shim
API in 4.0 to make it compatible with the 3.x driver line so people can actually use the thing without changing their client code?
Yeah, that will reduce the friction.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I like that.
It's a really good idea.
Yeah, anything that makes upgrading easy.
Yeah.
If it's possible, then
So Jordan,
I think you're absolutely right, Dinesh. I think that it doesn't. Nobody cares if the internals are different. It just doesn't work. And do they have to make changes? I think it's a really, really solid idea. I mean, I have no idea what that would look like, but.
So Jordan, you mentioned this whole, like, we probably should have a position as a project on what it means to be ready for a release with drivers able to connect to said release. So that's something I definitely think we don't want to drop in the ground, because like you mentioned, John, transient replication a couple of times, it's still marked as experimental. So it's like, do we want experimental feature support to be part of a blocker for a release or not? Like, these are all things, I'm not espousing a point of view, but these are things we need to talk through collectively.
I agree 100%. I don't know if that means a separate doc or just taking the doc Sumant started and we all collaborated on and extending it. Either way, I mean, it might be, whatever it is, I think we should try to state our values there as a project. And I think Josh brings up good points around the nuances on those things. So I think that's a definite action item from this meeting is moving that discussion to the mailing list.
One thing that I think that this kind of came up a little bit earlier, the idea that a lot of the work is going to have to be dependent on changes to the actual protocol, like stopping. And there has been some discussion like, hey, can we make this change still? Is there still time? I think we're going to have to cut that off. We're just going to have to, like, this is another mailing list discussion, but we have to say, hey, no more.
We made some statements about that actually in the original doc. I think we just need to refresh our memory, but I remember us having a debate. I think it can change through alpha and can't change in beta, but it's in the doc that Sumant started and we agreed on at Netflix.
Okay.
Or agreed on at Netflix. Agreed on
Apache
online with discussion in Vegas was where I was going. Sumant works at Netflix. Sorry.
Yep.
Well, we have a doc out there already around, like, this is what constitutes a release, a beta and alpha.
Yeah, so in there is the bit about the protocol. I'm just trying to remember where that is now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't create another doc. I have enough tabs going, man. Let's one doc to rule them all.
I think, Sumant, do you know where that doc ended up? Is it in GDoc or in the wiki in the end?
Not at the GDoc anymore. It should be in the Confluence.
Okay, let me pull that up then.
Yeah, I do remember seeing that in there.
Just GDoc for collab to add a new section on there and then integrate it when we settle on something.
Well, you know that Confluence does do Google Doc style. They pretty much emulated the Google Doc experience. You can have multiple people working on a doc and see them typing.
We have like stupid rules for access and you got to add everybody manually and all this other crap.
It's a pay it forward model. Like, once you have access, you can give access to anyone else. It's a viral model.
I guess we need a lot of people to have access anyway, so that would force us to do it.
Yeah.
So I think in the end it was worded as in beta should be interface stable so that consumers do not have to incur any code changes. But I think consumer here was meant to imply client developers. So it would be in beta that we stabilized it. but we should maybe clarify that further / add more things about the clients like we talked about. But
Did you find it? No, you found it.
yeah,
Okay.
it's in the chat.
Okay. I'll put it in the docs, in the notes.
So yeah, I think here, like we know for each section, we have a 4 Apache Cassandra users. It would be nice to like make a statement about clients there or something like that. And yeah.
All right, lively discussion. Anything more on this? I think we've gotten, this is interesting how we grounded out on some, we're going to dock. Awesome.
Yeah.
And again, I'm trying to keep track of the notes here, but and this recording will be available for, if we want to get others involved in this conversation, they can see where everyone was talking. So I'll have that up today probably, and then the notes as well. So if you want to invite your friends and family in to join in the conversation about this.
Yeah, I'm sure other time zones will have opinions.
I'm sure of it as well. And, you know, everyone sitting at home now is probably, you know, like, oh yeah, I'd love to get into a debate about drivers in Cassandra. I got some time on my hand. All right, is there any other topics we want to bring up? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we are recently working on 2.1 to 3 upgrade. So there are a lot of Thrift clusters, and we're trying to upgrade them to 3.0. And a couple of things we have noticed so far. One is so there is no cross streaming obviously between 2.1 and 3.0. So I'm trying to take a look at if that's a solvable problem, to have at least a 3.0 stream from 2.1. And second is we did do an assistable upgrade on one of the 2.1 Thrift clusters to 3.0, and we saw corruption on specific assistables. We are trying to narrow down on what specific kind of data would cause this. I'll keep the forum updated as I have more details. So that's about the activity that at least I'm doing right now.
Thanks, Sumanth. Good luck with your upgrades.
Yeah, had to be Netflix on. When, hey, we're using all Thrift still. That'll be a fun. Don't go to 4.0. You'll be surprised.
I was just about to ask. Right?
It will not work. No, I know that's a big problem there too. All right, is there anything else? One thing I just want to add is kind of a PSA for community, which is I am currently working with a lot of groups right now, like community organization groups around what's happening right now with our pandemic that we're all enjoying. But there's just a lot of activity going around, like, hey, we have a lot of nerds, a lot of people need help. How do we connect those? I just wanted to bring this up as something that potentially, you know, I'm going to try to get some organization around it. But I think there's a lot of people in the Cassandra community, especially in the Cassandra dev community, that have some amazing skills that could be helpful for some organizations. So just a heads up, I'm hoping to get all this kind of narrowed down. There's some really cool organizations forming around this. And I think this is just the group of people that could really help the most in some of these. So just a heads up. Okay, thank you everyone. Even without an agenda, we packed 45 minutes into this thing. Awesome.
Yeah, you said you wanted lively discussion, Patrick. You got it.
Well, as soon as John said drivers, I'm like, well, I might as well just park it. That's great.
No, I think that was a very important discussion. So.
I do too. So notes will be up. Recording will be up. As a matter of fact, let me